Hey everyone, get ready for a deep dive today, because we're going someplace I bet you haven't been before. We're diving into, well, it's kind of like where Buddhist meditation meets Western attachment theory.
Sounds a little like a self-help book left at a silent retreat, huh?
Exactly. But seriously, once we unpack this, we're going to see some seriously insightful, even mind-blowing connections. You
Yeah.
said this fascinating collection of articles and notes on this, and I'm so glad we're digging into it. I think it's so easy to think about, like, meditation is this path of detaching from everything.
Right, right.
But then attachment theory comes along, and it's all about how essential that human need for connection is. It's almost like, are these two ideas even compatible?
That's where it gets juicy. And to really get this, we got to start with what attachment even means, because it's got a different flavor depending on if you're talking about, Buddhism or Western psychology.
That's definitely two totally different perspectives.
Yeah. So in Buddhism, attachment, it's basically clinging that iron grip we have on, well, anything temporary, pleasurable, that resistance to change. And Buddhism teaches us that's like the root of suffering.
Okay. And doesn't that kind of connect to attachment theory too, though? Like when we see those insecure attachment styles, isn't that also rooted in a fear of losing connection? That fear of losing love or that security? It can really mess us up inside.
Absolutely. They're both talking about suffering in a way. Now, when we go over to the Western psych side, attachment gets a little more specific. We're
Yeah.
talking about the really deep bonds that we form, especially as babies with our caregivers.
Those first relationships, right?
Exactly. And those aren't just, passing things. They seriously shape how our brains are wired, which of course impacts how we connect, not just with other people, but even with ourselves throughout our entire lives. And this is where things get super interesting, because for our deep dive today, we're focusing on the psychology angle. We're going to see how those early attachment patterns, those first relationships, can either make meditation like a walk in the park or...
Or a total emotional obstacle course.
Exactly.
All right, buckle up, because this next part is where our deep dive takes a fascinating turn. We're going to see how meditation can actually be, in a way, a form of self-attachment.
A bit of a head scratcher, right?
It does seem kind of contradictory at first.
It is a powerful concept. John Churchill, he's a big name in all this, and he says that when we do mindfulness meditation, paying attention to our breath, our sensations, just noticing without judging, it's like giving ourselves the same kind of loving care that, say, a parent would give to a child.
Wow. So we become like a source of comfort for ourselves.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it. There's this one quote from a guided meditation. I think it was one of Churchill's colleagues leading it. And it goes, remembering that the ocean of awareness is a loving ocean. And so we're being pairing with all aspects of our experience with this loving, wise awareness, which you could say, in a sense, holds what arises within it. It's powerful stuff.
It really is. It's like, when you think about it, meditation, it lets us cultivate this sense of inner security, kind of mirroring that deep need for connection that attachment theory is all about.
Okay, but, and this is what I'm curious about, we always hear about meditation being this journey of transcending the self, detaching from our thoughts, our feelings. So how does that work if we're trying to also deepen our relationship with ourselves through self-attachment?
Well, that's the really cool part. This idea of self-attachment, it becomes even more concrete when we bring in visualization practices.
Oh, like the kind of stuff you see in Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big part of where John Churchill and those pointing out the great way teachers get their inspiration, blending those ancient practices with, modern Western psychology.
Okay, visualizations, that's got to be good for some seriously interesting stories. So paint a picture for us. How does that even work?
So picture this. You're meditating, right? And you start to visualize maybe a deity or a teacher you really respect, or even just this radiant field of light. And each one of these, they represent different qualities, like maybe wisdom, compassion, unconditional love.
And this is what they use to help people strengthen their attachment system from the inside out.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that it's not just some esoteric thing. There are actually parallels in regular Western psychology, like that ideal parent figure protocol, where people imagine interacting with this super supportive, compassionate figure to help rewire those attachment patterns.
So whether it's deity yoga or guru yoga or working with this ideal parent figure, or even what they call in POGW retinue or field of care, it sounds like they're all getting at the same thing, creating this feeling of safety and love internally.
Yes. You
Yeah.
got it. And the best part is, Anyone can learn how to do this. You don't have to be, some meditation master to connect with that feeling.
That's awesome. But okay, before we move on, can you explain retinue and field of care a little more? Those aren't exactly words you hear every day.
Right, they can be a little out there. So in POGW, when they talk about retinue, they're talking about that inner support system we can develop through these practices. You can think of it like, imagine this whole group of wise, loving beings just surrounding you, offering encouragement, acceptance, no matter what, like your own personal cheer squad for your spiritual growth.
I love that. And field of care.
That's that feeling of being totally held and supported, not just by those imagined figures, but by, well, almost like a universal love. It's kind of a big concept to wrap your head around.
It is, but it's also really beautiful. Like, even when we feel alone, we're actually surrounded by this invisible web of support.
Exactly. And, the more we can connect with that feeling in our meditation, the more it starts to show up in our lives outside of meditation, too.
So we've been talking about building this amazing inner sense of safety, like we're creating this loving bond with ourselves.
Yeah.
But then there's that paradox that Buddhism's also about, like transcending the self, letting go of attachment completely.
Yeah.
So how does that even work? If we're spending all this time cultivating a sense of self,
Yeah.
that's what I don't get.
It's a really interesting tension, isn't it? It's kind of at the core of what we're looking at today.
It's like we need that solid sense of self to even begin to understand going beyond our individual ego.
Yeah.
Right? Like secure attachment is a stepping stone.
Exactly. We have to truly feel at home within ourselves before we can even begin to get a sense of a connection bigger than that, beyond those boundaries.
It reminds me of that John Churchill quote about how if we all feel deeply safe and held, then it's easy to relax our minds. Like when we feel safe and loved, that's when we can finally loosen that grip on ourselves and, I don't know, maybe relax into something bigger.
Exactly. And the cool thing is that our attachment style, whether we're secure or anxious or avoidant, can actually help guide our meditation practice.
Oh, interesting. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all thing.
No, not at all. Different people need different approaches based on, their own experiences, their past. Like for someone who tends to be more anxious in their attachments, a teacher might suggest practices that really zero in on cultivating that sense of safety, compassion, connection. Maybe working with a particularly comforting deity in visualization, or really sinking into that feeling of being surrounded by a field of care.
And for someone who's more avoidant.
That's where you might focus on practices that help them, turn towards their inner experience, make friends with it instead of just shutting down or trying to escape it.
It's about like personalizing the practice, making it work for you.
Precisely. Meet people where they are, give them practices that support their unique journey.
It really shows how well this ancient wisdom of Buddhist meditation, how well it can work with modern psychology. And it seems like the core message, the thing that ties it all together, is this radical self-acceptance, embracing everything, the light and the dark parts, the secure parts and the insecure.
Yes. Recognizing that no part of us needs to be left out. And that goes for our meditation, too.
Yeah, and it's not about being perfectly blissful or making the inner critic be quiet. It's about showing up, being kind, being curious about all of who we are, even the messy parts.
Beautifully put. And from that place of really accepting ourselves, befriending ourselves, that's how we open up to such profound healing on and off the cushion.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it. And for everyone listening, here's something to think about. What if the real key to growing to deeper self-awareness isn't about silencing that inner child, but about really listening to it? What could we learn if we made space for that voice? We've covered so much in this deep dive today, thanks to you. And if you're listening and something really resonated, whether it's a quote, an idea, even a question, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts with us online using #DeepDiveAttachment. Let's keep this conversation going.